Welcome to our expert webinar, Chapter Recovery Moment, International Code for the Protection of Tourists. Bienvenidos a nuestro ciclo de webinar con expertos, Momentos de la Reconstrucción. El Código Internacional para la Protección de Turistas será el tema elegido para el día de hoy. Today we will have a webinar in English with translation into Spanish. Hoy tendremos una webinar en inglés con traducción simultánea al español. Please follow the on-screen instruction to listen to the Spanish translation. Por favor, a todos los hispanoparlantes, sigan las instrucciones que pueden ver ahora en la pantalla para escuchar la traducción en español. We will give a few seconds to open the Spanish channel. Daremos unos segundos para que se habilite entonces el canal español. Welcome, thank you, bienvenidos y gracias. I am Daniela Otero, CEO of Skl International, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us. Over the past 12 months, we have felt the need to create a framework of confidence for travelers. And the unusual situation generated by the pandemic has put an issue on the agenda: how to provide more legal protection for tourists. The World Tourism Organization considers it absolutely necessary to rebuild consumer and tourist confidence, and is therefore working on the elaboration on this international code for the protection of tourists. This project is already supported by almost 100 countries and will help to provide tourists affected by the emergency situation with clear and more consistent condition of assistance worldwide. Today we have with us to address this issue Alicia Gomez, legal counsel, World Tourism Organization since 2007. She has extensive experience in the international organization. Alicia also worked 15 years in the United Nations. She supported the process for development and adoption of World Tourism Organization's Framework Convention on Tourist Ethics, and now she is currently leading the process for the development of an international code for the protection of tourists. So welcome, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I'm very happy to be with you today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Skl International is an affiliate member of UNWTO, so we are really happy to be with you as you are a very close partner to the organization. And also personally, I would like to thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present this initiative to all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Today, we were supposed to be joined by Fabrizio Orlando, one of the important director for TripAdvisor. Fabrizio has had a family medical emergency and therefore he will not be able to join us today. We have already agreed that he will participate in another chapter of our webinar as soon as possible. Uncertainty and lack of trust in travel are among the biggest challenges facing the revival of tourism. The International Code for the Protection of Tourists will hopefully represent a crucial step forward in addressing this big problem. So this was the intention, Alicia, for invite today Fabricio. We will hope to talk with him in a few weeks about this. But what are the factors preventing tourism recovery?
So, as you said, it's a pity that we do not have Fabrizio, because he had very interesting data from TripAdvisor that he could show. But UNWTO also conducted recently, in October last year, a global survey among its panel of tourism experts. And among all the factors that are mentioned in this study as preventing tourism recovery, the three main factors are, first of all, travel restrictions. The second factor is the slow containment of the virus. And the third factor is the low confidence of tourist consumers. So this is the third main factor above the economic environment or the lack of coordination among countries. So we can say that aside from the impossibility to travel or the fear to becoming sick when you travel, there seem to be also many concerns regarding consumer protection and the lack of clarity when it comes to the rights of tourists in this new normality, as we call it. So clearly, the priority right now of governments rests on the efforts that they are making to contain the virus, the vaccination programs, and the harmonization of safety and security protocols that may help us to travel safely again. But as the survey reveals, there are also other aspects related to the uncertainty that has been created in tourists as consumers during the COVID-19 crisis. Many of us, and I think I can include myself here, are not afraid to travel again, at least not because of the virus, but we are afraid about the situations we may expose ourselves to where we book a trip. For instance, if I travel abroad and a new outbreak of the virus starts in the country that I'm visiting, and then as a result of it, I am stranded in that country, who will assist me? Will I have to pay the cost of being stranded, the accommodation, the repatriation out of my pocket? If I travel to a country and on the way back I am denied boarding because I have some drops of temperature and so I'm showing some symptoms of COVID, so I have to stay in that destination and perhaps I'm even requested to go through quarantine. Do I have to pay for the new ticket to go back home? Do I have to pay for the cost of accommodation, or will the airline provide for that in case I can demonstrate later on that I didn't have COVID? If I book a trip, will I be able to cancel it in case there is a major outbreak, new outbreak in the country that I was supposed to visit it? If yes, if I can cancel, will I have to pay fees? What if the trip is canceled because of travel restrictions? Will I get refunded? Will I get a voucher? What type of voucher? There seem to be all sorts of questions right now that a traveler needs to carefully assess that didn't exist before COVID-19. And the fact that the answers are so different from an airline to another, from a travel agency to another, and from a country to another are not helping at all in taking the decision to book a trip. So there seems to be too many obstacles right now that we are placing on people to travel again. And we do need to provide some reassurances so that people can decide to take the step and to expose themselves to all these risks, knowing that there is a framework that will cover and that is a clear framework that they can rely upon. So also, as far as we know, these risks will continue to be present for some time. So it is necessary to address these concerns if we wish to regain the tourist trust.
Mm-hmm. And what are the main objectives of the International Court for the Protection of Tourists? You mentioned a lot of questions, I think that we can imagine, but in the legal point of view.
I have prepared a presentation to support me in explaining a little bit the background and the objectives. So if we could go to
of course.
Yes.
We will show some slides to support your explanation about this topic, because it's new for all. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So if we can go to the first, yes, this slide. So just to give you a little bit the background of this initiative. In this slide, you see many of the situations that we have seen in the news during the COVID-19 crisis, that everyone has seen in the news. We have seen the closure of borders with little or no notice last year in March, April, May, with giving very little margin of reaction to tourists who were abroad. At some point, 100% of the destinations had partial or total travel restrictions. We have also seen how millions of tourists got stranded because of this situation during the crisis, and they suffered a different luck and treatment depending on their nationality and the destination in which they got stranded. We've seen outbreaks in cruises, in resorts, and in hotels. Tourists were confined in these places, and this raised also many legal issues as to who is responsible to pay for this accommodation. There was a lot of lack of information and clarity as to who is responsible for what. Also, we've seen that some tourists were granted limited access to accommodation and public health in some of the destinations during the lockdown. Millions of flights have been cancelled since last year. Some tourists got reimbursed. Some others were imposed vouchers. Some others were offered vouchers. These vouchers were very different. Some others were allowed to change the route, but at a higher cost. And finally, when tourists try to resort to their travel and health insurances, they realize that these do not cover acts of God, force majeure situations, such as the one of the COVID-19 pandemic. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So basically, all this situation has revealed to the tourist his vulnerability in the tourism value chain, perhaps a vulnerability that was not so much perceived before COVID-19. It has also undermined his confidence in the different tourism stakeholders, whether someone was traveling or was just watching the news and seeing what was happening there. And definitely what this situation has revealed is, on the one hand, that there is no legal framework, international legal framework for the assistance to tourists in emergency situations. And this is why we've seen so many different measures being taken. And at the same time, that there is a lack of uniformity at the international level when it comes to tourism consumer protection rights. And so this creates a big legal uncertainty for tourists. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the objectives of this initiative, the ultimate objective is to restore tourist confidence, to guarantee an appropriate degree of protection for international tourists in emergency situations, but also to harmonize minimum standards on consumer protection to avoid disparities and legal uncertainty, and prepare and establish a clear legal framework providing sufficient guarantees for this new normality and for the post-COVID-19. Of course, this is all part of the package that UNWTO has prepared to support governments and the private sector in international tourism recovery efforts. And although the priority right now may be on the containment of the virus and also the establishment of safety and security protocols when it comes to travel, this is yet another pillar to ensure that tourists are reassured whenever we are ready to resume travel. At the same time, we're talking about the protection of tourists, but I also want to clarify that we have also seen during the crisis that not all tourism stakeholders have borne the same burden during the crisis. And as a result, we've also seen that COVID-19 has somehow changed the rules of the game, that perhaps the rules that we had were not appropriate and were not thought for a situation such as COVID-19, and that it is necessary also to achieve a more fair and balanced share of responsibilities among all tourism stakeholders. Next slide, please. So with these objectives in mind, our Executive Council decided last year in September to establish an intergovernmental committee to develop an international code for the protection of tourists. And our mandate is to develop this code. So in this code, we will insert minimum standards to protect tourists in emergency situations, not only COVID-19. So we can think here also for the future, tsunamis, earthquakes, terrorist attacks, any other emergency situation, and also harmonize minimum standards on consumer rights of tourists for the post-COVID-19 scenario. We started working last year in October, at the end of October, so basically in November last year. Can we go to the next slide, please? We have gathered to date more than 100 countries in this group. This is absolutely unprecedented for UNWTO in this sort of, yes, unprecedented in sort of groups, and I think it's also probably the largest group of countries that is currently sitting and discussing and coming up with a new legal regime for the future. So we see this wide participation as a very strong sign of commitment from the countries to this initiative. Within the group, we have a consultative group of specialized experts. These are persons of recognized competence in the field of tourism and consumer protection law. And we also have observers. These observers are international organizations. So we have the European Commission, we have ICAO from the UN, we have UNCTAD, we have also many private stakeholders with international representation. This is very important to us, because we need the views of the private sector, because they are also the ones who have experienced how these rules have worked or not worked so well. So they need to be engaged and also provide us feedback. And we also have established a mechanism so that we can also gather the consolidated input of our affiliate members. As you know, Daniela, we have more than 500 affiliate members, which represent the private sector. So it's also very important for us to gather these views. So next slide, please. Just to let you know a little bit where we are right now and what has been our progress since last year, November. We started working on the assistance to international tourists in emergency situations. We were required to look at this topic first by the Executive Council because we are still in an emergency situation. So definitely this was the main priority. We have been developing these standards for the protection of tourists in emergency situations. These will be integrated as the first chapter of the code. We are currently finalizing this first chapter of the code, so this is quite an impressive progress since November. And the next steps are to develop our work plan for this year so that we can include other chapters. We can see what other topics we should be including in this code, and that we can present a progress report to the General Assembly of UNWTO in October. So hopefully we can present the whole code. If not, we can present some chapters, but at least definitely it would be necessary to advance as much as we can and have our General Assembly endorse this so that the countries will also adhere to it. Next slide. So this was just basically to try to give you an overview.
Perfect. No, it was fantastic. You mentioned, but not in detail, who sits on this expert committee for this project?
Yes, so within the committee, we established a pool of independent experts to assist the Secretariat in the drafting of the code and also to advise the committee. Taking into account that we are looking at very complex legal issues and also at different legal systems around the world, we needed extra help, knowledge, expertise, and also capacity to address the challenges involved in harmonizing consumer protection standards. So these independent experts are appointed by the Secretary General in agreement with the committee. They serve on a pro bono basis, and they are specialized in tourism law or tourism consumer protection. Right now we have 4 experts. We have Professor Francesco Morandi from Italy. We have Professor Diego Benitez from Argentina, Professor Hein Chen from China, and the Honorable Ms. Malonda from Malawi, who is a judge in a high commercial court in Malawi. So we are currently still missing, we wanted ideally to have one per region. We are still missing one expert from the Middle East. But of course, this is not a closed group. So we may also expand this group as we, move along with the different topics that we are analyzing. And I also want to say we're very privileged to have these individuals providing this very generous contribution to us, and very grateful for their support.
Because you told me that it's free of charge.
Pro bono. They are doing this pro bono. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. Will this document be binding?
Well, that's a very good question. And thanks for asking it, because I think that it's a question that is still even going on in the committee. I think that the first thing probably to bear in mind is that international organizations do not always have the power to impose standards on countries unless governments are willing to adhere to these standards. So we have simply not been given that authority. Most of the documents, the resolutions, the recommendations that UNWTO issues may not be legally binding, but however, they have a significant political influence. And because they represent the consensus of a wide number of countries, so then at the end of the day, they are effectively implemented in these countries, and they influence other countries to also implement them. In this case, in the case of the code, the discussion on the legal nature of the code has not yet been decided, and the committee, in fact, one of its first meetings decided that it would discuss this at a later stage when we have developed more of the code and countries can have a better idea and a better understanding of how the code could be implemented. So at the time, we are aiming at producing a code that represents useful guidance, which is very much needed, and the consensus of the majority of the member states of the organization, so that governments can adhere to it on a voluntary basis after being called to do so by the General Assembly. And then once they would adhere, UNWTO could monitor whether they are actually implementing the code or not and request them to take remedial actions if necessary. It is true that there are already some ongoing discussions from a group of countries and stakeholders that would like this code, once it is developed, converted into an international legally binding convention. In which case, the application of the provisions would then be legally binding on the countries that would ratify the convention. But we have to bear in mind that negotiating, concluding, and ratifying a convention takes a lot of time. And what we are trying to come up here is with an improved legal framework that serves already now to countries and tourists. So in this sense, starting with the code has given us and is giving us more flexibility and agility to develop these standards. And I think they will be ready sooner and could be used by countries then immediately without having to wait, for the conclusion of the convention and the ratification of the country.
Mm-hmm. International organization, the European Commission, and the private sector will be invited to join this historic initiative to achieve a more balanced and equal distribution of responsibility among all tourism stakeholders, like you mentioned, in post-COVID-19 world. Will an agreement be achieved? Because we see that the biggest challenge of the pandemic is to find uniform decision-making among the different countries. For this, I ask you this question.
Yes, as we discussed once, I think that it's probably because in other groups, the scientific evidence is very important to take these decisions, and this is changing from a week to another. So in that, our group is a little bit more privileged. I mean, still, this is a very challenging topic with many countries involved that have very different legal regimes, with many different stakeholders involved having very different positions, sometimes opposing, and we will need to reconcile these positions. But I have to say that what we have experienced so far since November is a great commitment and involvement from the member states to find solutions and to agree on a text. So I think that countries and tourism administrations are aware of how crucial this document will be, and how much they will be able to reassure tourists whenever this code is ready, by stating that we have adhered and we are complying with it. So you can look in this code what will be your guarantees if you come to visit us. In fact, many countries have included or are including this code as one of the elements in their recovery strategy. And you know, if you think that we started working in November last year and that we are currently in February finalizing the first chapter of the code on the assistance to tourists in emergency situations, we really think this is very promising. So far, the comments and amendments made by member states on the text have gone in the direction of making the text more precise, but they're not really opposing to the content that the Secretariat and the experts were initially proposing to them. So we are in the right direction. I mean, we cannot predict the future, and we also know that we're going to be facing many challenges and many topics that are going to require lengthy discussions, lengthy negotiations. But I think also, you know, there's a message from our Secretary General that he has been conveying throughout the crisis, which is that we need to think big and we need to be ambitious, because this is an unprecedented crisis, the biggest one of the sector. And we also need to find a common approach and to coordinate solutions. And I think we are seeing this coming through this project. So I am quite optimistic, and also seeing the, you know, the results that and the progress that we have made so far.
Will be a big step. You mentioned, but at the next World Tourist Organization General Assembly to be held at the end of 2021, October, you mentioned, will be in Marrakech, right?
Yes.
Morocco. The International Code for the Protection of Tourists is expected to be present for approval by member countries. Could you give us a concrete idea of how travelers can be protected by this new code?
Yes, so I have also prepared a presentation so that
Perfect.
it's easier to follow, because the topic is a little bit complex.
Okay,
I will only give you examples right now on the topic we have been working on, which is the assistance to tourists in emergency situations. We are going to develop other standards on consumer protection, but of course I wouldn't dare, you know, to yet say what the code will cover, because that's the decision of the committee. And so perhaps we will need another webinar at some point to cover that.
But this is amazing. We have maybe a draft, an idea about the working on.
Exactly. So you can also see the sort of situations that we are intended to cover, and the solutions, right, that are covered by this code. So let's go, if you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, again. And next slide, sorry, I'm just gonna jump a little bit. So the assistance to tourists in emergency situations, this first chapter of the code, is centered in 4 topics: prevention, information, assistance, and repatriation. So regarding prevention, some of the things that we have seen during the crisis is the fact that countries were not prepared. So they didn't have structures in place to address a crisis. And again, we're talking not only about COVID-19. I mean, now, yes, we are in COVID-19, but in the future, this framework could apply to any other emergency situations, and we know they happen. Tsunamis, terrorist attacks, earthquakes. So one of the things that the code, that this chapter is requiring countries to do, is to set up crisis management services, I mean, permanent structures, crisis management services that are ready to be operational the moment that there is an emergency. Also that plans and protocols are already developed, that they are available, that they have been communicated to the tourism service provider and to all tourism service stakeholders, so that everyone knows exactly what they have to do and what is their role whenever there is an emergency situation. Because this is one of the things that we have seen, is that when the emergency started, no one really knew what they were supposed to do. We are also requesting countries to develop apps, leaflets, and all other materials, information materials and communication materials in alternative formats, so that everyone is duly informed. And regarding, for example, the millions of flights that have been cancelled, which is a typical situation that happens whenever there is an emergency, what we are going to be working right now as a complement of what we have done is on harmonizing and clarifying cancellation policies in these situations, regulate the use of vouchers, establish systems of protection against the insolvency of tourism service providers, so that we're all working under the same framework, and that a tourist doesn't need to analyze the law of the country or hire a lawyer to know what he or she can expect in case his flight is cancelled because of an emergency situation. Next slide, please. Regarding the information in emergency situations, so we saw, as I said before, during the crisis that the borders were closed with little or no notice, and still now we see that there's a lack of information on the travel restrictions, so that they change very, very fast, and sometimes tourists are not duly informed. So we are requesting countries to provide real-time information and updated information on the border procedures, on transportation, on restrictions, public health and safety measures. These information, we're also requesting that tourism service stakeholders echo this information too. And we are also requesting countries through this chapter to promote and ensure that there is an exchange of information between the tourism and accommodation service providers and the relevant authorities on the host country concerning the tourist identities, contact information, health condition, location of the tourists that are stranded, because we have also seen that sometimes there was lack of cooperation, and the information was not getting in the right time in order to be able to react. So in the next slide, please. Regarding the assistance in emergency situations, so again here, when millions of tourists got stranded, we are requesting the host country to ensure that tourists' basic needs are met, and we've seen that that has not always been the case. So of course, sometimes by the contract, the tourism service stakeholders are the ones who are to provide some of this assistance. But at the same time, this chapter is also reflecting on the duty of the host country to enable tourism service stakeholders to provide this assistance, even by promoting financial schemes that could help tourism service stakeholders to effectively provide this assistance. Also, regarding the cancellations of flights, which is a topic that comes again every time there is an emergency situation. We are also, the chapter is also requesting that the host country ensures that the accommodation service provider does not request cancellation fees if the tourist, for example, is not able to reach the accommodation because of the emergency. And in the case of the travel insurances, we had a very interesting last meeting with the committee with the Alliance. So in this case, for instance, what we are requiring countries is to ensure that tourism contracts provide insurance schemes related to COVID. But at the same time, we are requesting them to promote also that other insurance schemes are developed for other emergency situations, because right now there have been schemes that have been developed specifically for COVID-19 as a result of the crisis. However, these sort of schemes are still not available, for other emergency situations. And so although there seems to be a trend that is changing, we believe that this should also be a product that should be there and available for tourists. So next slide, please. In the case of repatriation in emergency situations, which is of course very important if you're stranded abroad, so we are also regulating in this chapter the duty to inform and the responsibilities of each stakeholder to provide information so that the repatriation can be effectively conducted. Also, the responsibilities of the host country to ensure the repatriation, to facilitate visa requirements, even if this is included in the contract with a tourism service provider or travel insurance, because let's be honest, sometimes we've seen that the tourism service provider or the travel insurance were not in a position to actually conduct this repatriation, and this was really something that only the host country was in a position to do. In the case of tourists facing difficulties to move within the country because of the mobility restrictions, so we've seen, for example, for COVID, there have been some, in the case of COVID, there have been some mobility restrictions in countries, so we are requesting that the host country guarantees and facilitates the freedom of movement of the tourist so that he or she can reach the city or the airport in which he's to be repatriated. And also we are regulated what should be the coordination and the cooperation that is necessary between countries so that repatriation can be done in the best possible way. And also in facilitating also other necessary operational measures that may be necessary in cases of emergency, such as transit of official or medical staff and equipment if necessary. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you an idea with some, examples that perhaps can resonate. Of course, the work is still in progress. So, but I think that once we have finalized this chapter of the code, hopefully next month we will be publishing it, so you will also be able to see it.
No, it's very clear. Thank you, Alicia. Actually, we have a lot of questions from the audience. So the first question is, can we get a copy of this presentation for local discussion about this chapter? I think that yes, maybe we can include in our communication when we send this webinar recorded, we can include a link for this presentation. So yes, of course. The second question is this project for organized tourism only or for individual tourists as well?
Sorry, what is the first?
Yeah, is this project for organized tourism only or individual tourism as well? I think that the project covers all the situation, yes. Not only the companies, it's for people who travel.
Exactly. I mean, the purpose of the code is to restore tourist confidence. So of course, it's also about the protection of tourists, but the code is addressed to governments. And so it is for governments to take certain responsibilities and to ensure also in their respective countries that these provisions will be applicable. The code covers everyone because we are touching upon the responsibilities of countries, of the host country, of the country of origin. We are also touching about the responsibility of the traveler also. Let's not forget that the tourist also has some responsibilities. And we're also touching on the responsibilities of all other tourism service providers. So accommodation providers and also travel agencies, tour operators. So it actually covers everyone.
The next question have a relationship with the vaccination. So what is the vaccinations and the relation with this project? You will include it or not?
So we, right now, we have been working, our committee has been working in an ILO, in a sort of an ILO, because we have been developing this assistance to tourists in emergency situations. Definitely, as we move on in the project, we want to coordinate with other groups that are working on the vaccination, on the safety and security protocols, because the safety and security protocols are going to impose new obligations on the tourists. So we should also, develop the rights that will go with these obligations. The vaccinations are going to raise a lot of issues to vaccination passports and all of other issues. So we may also need to include. It's true that right now, perhaps because the discussion of the vaccination and the vaccination passport is still not mature enough, we don't have the basis to include it in our document. But once it is, and same for the safety and security protocols, but once it is, our idea is to connect with the other groups and to take whatever has been produced, hopefully also harmonized, so that we can also make some, integrate some rights and some protection for tourists in our own code.
Thank you. Another question is in relationship, what issue do you think, or you think that will be more difficult to agree with the country about this project?
So one of the topics that I think is going to be a difficult one for sure, and I'm saying this because we have seen it during the crisis, and I don't think there has been an agreement on it, is the use of the vouchers. Because as we know, in the EU, for instance, vouchers can never be imposed, so they need to be accepted by the consumer. However, during the crisis, some EU countries made amendments to the directive so that it could have flexibility, and of course this was to protect tourism service providers, to protect them from insolvency. There was a purpose behind it, but they did allow the use of these vouchers, and then we've seen all types of vouchers. So from our perspective, the use of vouchers is not necessarily negative. It is a good instrument, it is a good tool. Perhaps some flexibility could be found there, but of course the voucher also needs to come with many guarantees. But we know that this is a topic that has many different—
Hot topic.
Hot topic, but the necessary one to discuss and agree on, because it has been really a chaos, all these different vouchers that have been issued and are still being issued.
Mm-hmm. Do you consider the current European package travel law, which define the protection of tourists if package holidays are booked?
If we are considering it in the work, we are definitely considering it in the work. We have the European Commission with us as an observer. They worked with us previously. I forgot to mention that this project is based on a draft convention on consumer protection that the organization worked on for many years in the past, well, many years, 6 years in the past, but did not reach the stage to be adopted. And then now with COVID, we have many other situations that have come in. So, but the European Commission worked with us in the past, and they are now again in this committee. Of course, they are a big stakeholder here because the European Commission is probably the most advanced in terms of guaranteeing consumer protection. Many countries are looking at the EU, and many of them want to, many of the countries outside the EU are looking at the EU as an example, and they do wish to, harmonize and adapt some and take some of the EU standards that are quite high. But at the same time, these countries outside the EU are also aware that during the crisis, the EU rules have also had many gaps and many issues that were not perhaps appropriately addressed, and that they are caveats that need to be looked at. So it's going to be an interesting discussion here. At the same time, we know that the European Commission will be revising the package travel directive in 2022. So we think this is a good time to start this discussion and not do it, as an EU discussion, but as an international discussion, because at the end of the day, we are looking into having a framework that applies to all, or at least some minimum standards that would apply globally at the international level.
Mm-hmm. The next question for the answer have relation with the airline voucher systems. if you know, was the main topic during the first months, the last year. You can consider this topic in the new code?
This is actually, we have been requested, so we are finalizing right now the draft, but more like the wording, the final wording of chapter 1. But we have been already requested by the committee to develop as a complement to what we have done on the assistance to tourists in emergency situations, which covers more, the humanitarian aspects of this subject, to cover also the contractual issues that arise in emergency situations, such as the cancellation policies, the vouchers. So this is our next topic on the list. Also because, well, we are in an emergency situation, but one that is taking a very long time. So we know that this is also a great concern for tourists right now and probably in the short term.
We have another question. In the future, can this help be included in the travel insurance, including when paying by credit card? Was another issue and discussion, the paying with credit card and not cash, for example.
So that question will probably be better addressed to the insurance companies.
Yes.
We know, I mean, we've discussed with them, and we have a big group in our, a big insurance group in our committee as an observer. So they are also providing us with feedback on the trends, because the trends are changing very, very fast. In the insurance schemes that are being provided. So for example, if last year when the pandemic started, insurance providers would not cover emergency situations, it was a typical case of exclusion, or it was, unless you would have a very expensive, that you would have purchased a very expensive policy. Right now, they have developed COVID-19 insurance, and so now it's available in any travel insurance. They have not developed for other emergency situations. They are doing that on the credit card and cash. Actually, this question has not been raised. As I say, the trends are changing and evolving. They are very, very fast. So I think we will probably see many developments.
Mm-hmm. How do you plan to enforce this code? Well, we mentioned
yes. So as I said before, there are basically two ways. One is a more political approach, and the other one is a more legal approach. So on the political side, the code could be, a document, a soft law document that is endorsed by a General Assembly, that has gathered a wide consensus, that is adhered to by the countries, and the countries could request UNWTO to monitor that this code is effectively. So perhaps the countries could have a seal saying that they have adhered to this code. They will have to send us reports, so we would monitor that effectively, they are. And so if they are not complying with the code, then we would be able to address it at the political level through the General Assembly. The other possibility would be to have a legally enforceable document, but at the international level, that would only be in the form of an international convention. And although the discussion is there, and some countries are looking into already now into having that in the future, the truth is that that would take more time. So that's that's something that will probably be addressed when we reach the General Assembly, what should be the level of enforcement and the legal nature of this code. But for now, I think that what is really important, I think that if we manage to have a useful document, countries adhere to it, then it will become just as it will become just as a principle as we have for the Global Code of Ethics for Tourism, that we have another code at UNWTO that is not legally binding, but that through time has been adhered by most of the, of the UNWTO member states. So
we have a 5 minutes more for finalize. So we have another question for the audience. Two questions actually. What are the next steps for the elaboration of this code? And the second is, when will the public be able to see the result?
So the next steps, as I mentioned, is finalize chapter 1. And then at the next meeting, we are also going to discuss what are going to be the other chapters of the code. So the structure of the code, what are going to be the topics that we are going to develop. Then we will start developing these topics. We will see if when we reach the General Assembly in October, we have finalized the draft of the code and we can present the whole code, or if we can present at least some chapters and then request our General Assembly to mandate us to finalize this code. Also taking into account that, as we said, some topics may not be mature enough so that we can integrate them into our code when we reach the General Assembly in October. And as to what will the public be able to see it, our intention is to publish these chapters as we approve them. So as a committee approves them on an interim basis, while we are waiting for the endorsement of the General Assembly, because we think that already some countries could be using this as guidance. This is valuable guidance, and we have such a large and representative group of more than 100 countries that definitely we think this is something that needs to be shared. So if, for example, in a month we have our next meeting and we finalize the chapter 1, then we will be publishing it on our website to make it available to everyone.
More or less, at the end of this year, everything is okay, we'll be able to use for the next year this code. So it's amazing because in 1 year, you finalize with the team a big issue, a big challenge.
Yes, but I think, well, of course, it will depend on the committee and how fast we progress on the other topics that we have under discussion. But I think this is one, because what we are seeing is that the countries are really involved and very positive, and they are really trying to agree on a text. So we are moving fast. That's the first thing that we're seeing. So this is very encouraging. And the second is that adapting this code, this idea of the code is giving us a lot of flexibility, because instead of arguing about how the code will be enforced and will be the sanctions and what, we're just talking about content right now. And so we are progressing on content, which is with what at the end of the day, the guidance that is badly needed. So.
By way of conclusion, this is not, of course, an urgent issue like a vaccination, for example, but it's a very necessary one, right, Alicia?
Yes, I think it depends on how you look at, urgency. Of course, the urgency right now, the priority right now, is containing the virus and the vaccination programs, and in the case of travel, the safety, establishing and harmonizing safety and security protocols so that we can travel safely. That's the #1 priority, health. But if you think of the future, this will be an essential document. Because what the surveys are telling us is that consumers are not reassured at all by the consumer protection standards and the lack of uniformity. So unless we start now, working now with urgency on this, we won't be able, because this takes time to negotiate, to discuss, to decide, we won't be able to have this ready for when we are really going to resume travel.
Well, we have comments to the end of our webinar today. Thank you so much, Alicia, for your participation. I think that is a very interesting topic, and we need like a sector, tourist sector, this, like a Bible, and have the support for the organization and the countries is a hope. I think that is a hope to have something clear. So thank you so much. We are in touch, so we can provide to the members and to the sector all the information about this project. So
thank you very much, Daniela, again for inviting us, and personally my thanks for having me, even if we miss Fabrizio and we're sending him our best wishes. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Also, thank you to our audience, and we look forward to see you in our next webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.